7-year-old Emma Richardson discovered the collapsed biker in the snow outside her grandmother's house on the coldest night of winter. His leather jacket bore the skull and wings of the Hells Angels, a sight that would have sent most people running. But Emma saw something different, a human being who needed help. She dragged the unconscious man inside, wrapped him in blankets, and stayed by his side until he regained consciousness. When Marcus Steele Thompson opened his eyes to find a small girl tending his frostbitten hands, he knew his life had changed forever. The grizzled veteran of countless road wars had been saved by pure innocence, but what would happen when his Brotherhood learned what this little girl had done for one of their own? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Rose Richardson's kitchen, casting delicate patterns across the worn wooden table where she and her granddaughter Emma shared their daily breakfast ritual. The antique tea set, a wedding gift from 1952, gleamed softly in the gentle light. Rose poured steaming cocoa into Emma's favorite cup, the one with tiny painted roses that matched her grandmother's name. "Careful now, sweetheart. It's still quite hot," Rose said, her voice carrying the warmth of 68 years of loving and nurturing. Emma blew gently across the surface of her cocoa, watching the steam swirl and dance. At 7 years old, she possessed an unusual stillness for a child her age, a thoughtful quality that often surprised adults. Her dark hair was pulled back in neat braids, and her brown eyes held a depth that seemed to understand more than her years should allow. "Grandma Rose, why do some people look scary, but aren't really scary inside?" Emma asked, stirring her cocoa with careful precision. Rose paused in buttering Emma's toast, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. This was Emma's way, asking questions that went straight to the heart of things, seeing past surfaces to something deeper. "Well, my dear, sometimes people have hard lives that make them build walls around themselves, like a castle with high walls to keep enemies out. But inside the castle there might be a very gentle person who's just learned to protect themselves." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her young mind. "Like how porcupines have sharp quills, but they're just trying not to get hurt." "Exactly like that," Rose smiled, marveling at her granddaughter's ability to understand complex truths through simple comparisons. Their small town of Millbrook had been Emma's entire world since she came to live with her grandmother 2 years ago. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving Rose to raise this precious child in her golden years. It hadn't been the retirement she'd planned, but it had become the greatest joy of her later life. The house itself seemed designed for nurturing a child's growth. Built in 1948, it had the kind of solid construction that promised safety and permanence. The wraparound porch invited long conversations and lazy summer afternoons. Inside, every room told stories of family gatherings, birthday celebrations, and quiet moments of learning. Emma's bedroom was a sanctuary of soft colors and gentle textures. Rose had carefully preserved some of Emma's mother's childhood belongings, a wooden rocking horse, shelves of well-loved books, and a collection of stuffed animals that had comforted 3 generations of children. "What shall we do today, little one?" Rose asked, clearing away the breakfast dishes. "Can we visit Mrs. Peterson? I want to see if her cat had her babies yet." This was Emma's nature, always concerned about others, always wanting to help. She befriended every neighbor, remembered every pet's name, and seemed to possess an invisible antenna for detecting when someone needed kindness. They bundled up against the December cold and walked the 3 blocks to visit their elderly neighbor. Emma skipped alongside her grandmother, stopping to examine interesting ice formations and to scatter breadcrumbs for the winter birds. Mrs. Peterson's tabby cat had indeed delivered 4 tiny kittens, and Emma spent an hour sitting quietly beside the nest, watching the newborns with reverent fascination. "They're so little and helpless," she whispered to her grandmother. "But their mama knows exactly how to take care of them, Animals have strong instincts about caring for their young, Rose explained. And sometimes humans do too. We just have to listen to what our hearts tell us is right. Walking home as afternoon shadows lengthened, Emma collected interesting stones and fallen pine cones, treasures she would add to her nature collection. The winter air carried the promise of snow, and Rose quickened their pace slightly. "Grandma, if someone was hurt and needed help, we should help them even if they look different from us, right?" Rose stopped walking and knelt down to Emma's eye level. "Of course, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking about what you said about people having walls around them. Maybe sometimes they need help taking the walls down. You have such a wise heart." "Emma, yes, we should always try to help people who need it, no matter how they might look on the outside." As they reached their front gate, neither of them could have imagined that, before the next day was over, Emma would have the chance to put this philosophy to its ultimate test. The peaceful rhythm of their quiet life was about to be disrupted by forces beyond their small-town experience. But the foundation of love and compassion Rose had built in Emma's character would prove stronger than any storm. The weather reports had been warning about it for 3 days, but when the storm finally hit Millbrook, it arrived with a fury that surprised even the meteorologists. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and the first fat snowflakes began falling like white coins from a leaden sky. Marcus Steele Thompson felt the change in the air pressure before he saw the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. 23 years of riding had taught him to read weather patterns like other men read newspapers. His Harley-Davidson rumbled beneath him, a 1,200-pound extension of his own body after decades of partnership between man and machine. The leather jacket he wore told his story without words. The Hells Angels patch across his broad shoulders commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Smaller patches marked his rank, his years of service, his loyalty to the Brotherhood that had become his family after the army discharged him 15 years ago. The jacket itself was more than clothing. It was armor, identity, and sacred trust, all stitched together in black leather and silver studs. He was 200 miles from home, riding back from a chapter meeting in Albany when the storm caught him. The forecast had called for light snow starting after midnight. Mother Nature, apparently, hadn't consulted the weather service. The first hour wasn't too bad. Marcus had ridden through worse conditions, and his bike handled well on the gradually deteriorating roads. But as darkness fell and the snow began coming down in sheets, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The highway became a treacherous ribbon of ice and slush, and even his experienced riding skills were no match for the increasingly dangerous conditions. He pulled off at the Millbrook exit, planning to find a motel and wait out the storm. The small town looked peaceful under its growing blanket of snow, Christmas lights twinkling in windows like earthbound stars. But the motel sign flashed "No vacancy," and the diner was already closing early due to the weather. Marcus considered his options. He could try to make it to the next town, but the storm was intensifying by the minute. Ice was beginning to form on his visor, and his hands were growing numb, despite his insulated gloves. The smart thing would be to find shelter and wait for morning. He spotted a small park with a covered pavilion and decided to ride through the residential neighborhood to reach it. The streets were empty except for the occasional snowplow, and porch lights created warm pools of yellow in the swirling white darkness. That's when the black ice caught him. The motorcycle hit the invisible patch at exactly the wrong angle, on a slight downhill slope, just as Marcus was navigating around a parked car. Physics took over where skill left off. The bike went down hard, sliding 20 feet before coming to rest against a wooden fence. Marcus hit the pavement and rolled, his jacket and helmet protecting him from the worst of the impact. But his left leg twisted beneath him with a sickening pop. For a few moments, he lay still in the snow, taking inventory. His helmet had cracked but done its job. His jacket was torn but had saved his skin. His leg, however, was definitely broken, and the cold was already seeping through his clothes where the leather had been compromised. The motorcycle's engine had died in the crash, and the sudden silence was profound. Snow continued to fall steadily, already beginning to dust his prone form. Marcus tried to stand, but collapsed immediately as pain shot through his leg like lightning. He fumbled for his cell phone, but the screen was cracked and dark. The device had taken the brunt of his impact with the ground and was clearly beyond use. The emergency beacon in his jacket's inner pocket was his backup, but it would take hours for anyone to reach him in these conditions. Assuming they could even locate him precisely in the storm. The cold was becoming serious now. Marcus had enough experience with harsh conditions to know that hypothermia was a real threat. He needed shelter, warmth, and medical attention for his leg. Looking around through the falling snow, he could see house lights nearby, but they seemed impossibly distant. He began crawling toward the nearest house, dragging his injured leg behind him. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body, and the snow was soaking through his damaged jacket. The house with the welcoming porch light was perhaps 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. Halfway there, his strength gave out completely. The combination of shock, pain, and rapidly dropping body temperature overwhelmed his considerable willpower. Marcus Steele Thompson, feared member of one of America's most notorious motorcycle clubs, collapsed face first in the snow beside a child's abandoned bicycle, consciousness slipping away as the storm raged around him. Emma had been watching the snow fall from her bedroom window when she spotted the dark shape in their front yard. At first, she thought it might be a fallen tree branch, but something about the way it was positioned made her look more carefully. When she realized it was a person lying motionless in the snow, her 7-year-old heart began racing with concern rather than fear. Grandma Rose had gone next door to help Mrs. Fletcher with her furnace, which had chosen this worst possible night to break down. She told Emma to stay inside and keep warm, but she hadn't said anything about what to do if someone needed help in their yard. Emma pulled on her winter boots and coat without hesitation. Her grandmother had taught her that helping people was always the right thing to do, and this person clearly needed help. She grabbed her toy doctor's bag from the hallway closet, a pink plastic case filled with play medical instruments that she'd received for her 6th birthday and treasured. Above all her other toys, the cold hit her like a physical wall when she opened the front door, but Emma pressed forward through the deepening snow. Up close, she could see that the person was a very large man wearing a black leather jacket covered with patches and metal studs. His motorcycle lay on its side near the fence, steam rising from its engine in the frigid air. Most children would have run back inside screaming. Marcus Thompson, even unconscious and injured, was an intimidating figure. His weathered face bore the scars of old fights, his massive hands were covered in tattoos, and his jacket proclaimed his membership in one of America's most feared motorcycle clubs. But Emma saw none of that. She saw a hurt person who needed her help. Mister, can you hear me?" she called out, kneeling beside him in the snow. When he didn't respond, she opened her toy medical bag and pulled out her plastic stethoscope. Placing it against his chest the way she'd seen doctors do on television, his heartbeat was strong but slow, and she could see his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. That meant he was alive, which was good. But his face was very pale, and there was blood on his forehead where his helmet had cracked. Emma knew she couldn't leave him in the snow. Grandma Rose always said that hurt people needed to be kept warm and dry. The problem was that Marcus probably weighed more than twice what Emma did, and he was completely unconscious. But Emma Richardson had inherited her grandmother's stubborn determination, along with her compassionate heart. She grabbed Marcus under his arms and began pulling with all her might. At first he barely moved, but Emma didn't give up. Inch by inch, she dragged the unconscious biker toward her front porch. "Come on, mister," she panted, her small face red with exertion. "We need to get you inside where it's warm." It took her nearly 20 minutes to drag Marcus the 30 feet to their front door. By the time she got him onto the covered porch, both of them were covered in snow, and Emma was exhausted. But she wasn't finished yet. Getting him through the door required more creative problem-solving. Emma opened the door wide, then used her father's old snow shovel as a lever to help roll Marcus across the threshold. Once she had him inside the entryway, she closed the door against the storm and assessed her next steps. Marcus was still unconscious, but at least he was out of the snow. Emma covered him with every blanket she could find in the house, creating a warm cocoon around his large frame. She filled a hot water bottle from the kitchen and placed it near his chest, then used a clean dish towel to gently clean the blood from his forehead. "There," she said softly, sitting back to admire her work. "That's much better." She opened her toy medical bag again and pulled out a plastic thermometer, carefully placing it in Marcus's mouth the way Grandma Rose did when Emma had a fever. While she waited, she talked to him in the same gentle voice her grandmother used when Emma was sick. "My name is Emma, and you're going to be okay. I think your leg might be hurt because it's bent funny, but Grandma Rose says the doctors can fix almost anything. She'll be home soon and she'll know what to do." The thermometer beeped, and Emma frowned at the reading. She couldn't quite read all the numbers yet, but she knew it should be higher. The man was still too cold. She added another blanket and sat down beside him to wait, one small hand resting gently on his arm. "Don't worry, mister. I'm going to take good care of you until help comes." Marcus opened his eyes to the soft glow of lamplight and the gentle sound of a child's voice. For a moment, he thought he might be dreaming or perhaps hallucinating from hypothermia. But the warmth surrounding him was real, and so was the small figure sitting beside him on the floor. "Oh, good, you're awake," Emma said cheerfully, as if finding unconscious bikers in her living room was a perfectly normal occurrence. "I was getting worried because you were sleeping for a really long time." Marcus tried to sit up, but pain shot through his left leg like fire, and his head spun from the sudden movement. He fell back against the pile of pillows Emma had arranged behind him, trying to process what was happening. "Easy there, mister," Emma said, placing her small hand on his shoulder with surprising authority. "You hurt your leg when your motorcycle fell down. You shouldn't try to move too much until the doctor comes." "Who?" Marcus's voice came out as a croak. His throat was raw from the cold, and speaking required more effort than it should have. "I'm Emma," she said, offering him a cup of warm tea. "I found you in our yard and brought you inside so you wouldn't freeze. Are you feeling better now?" Marcus stared at her in amazement. This tiny girl, who couldn't weigh more than 50 pounds, had somehow rescued him from the storm. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 230 pounds. How had she managed to get him inside? You brought me in here?" "Uh-huh. It was pretty hard work, but Grandma Rose always says we should help people who need help." "You needed help." Marcus looked around the cozy living room, taking in the family photographs on the mantelpiece, the comfortable furniture, and the warm atmosphere that spoke of a loving home. Then he looked down at himself, seeing his torn and dirty leather jacket against the clean blankets, his muddy boots on the polished hardwood floor. "Kid, you don't understand. I'm not the kind of person you should be helping." Emma tilted her head, studying his face with the intense curiosity of a child. "Why not? You were hurt and cold. Hurt people need help. Look at me," Marcus said, gesturing to his jacket with its intimidating patches. "Look at what I am." Emma examined his jacket carefully, tracing one of the patches with her finger. "You're a motorcycle rider. That's pretty cool. I like motorcycles. It's more than that, kid. These patches, they mean I'm part of a group that most people are afraid of. Are you a bad person?" Emma asked directly. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Was he a bad person? He'd done things he wasn't proud of, lived a life that existed on the margins of society, made choices that had led him down dark paths. But sitting here, looking into this child's innocent eyes, he found himself thinking about who he used to be. His hand moved unconsciously to his wallet, where he kept the only photograph that really mattered to him anymore. With trembling fingers, he pulled out the small, worn picture of a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "She would have been about your age now. Emma moved closer, studying the photograph with reverent attention. "She's pretty." "What's her name?" "Her name was Sarah. She died 3 years ago. Car accident." "I'm sorry," Emma said with the simple sincerity that only children possess. "That must make you very sad." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. He hadn't talked about Sarah to anyone in years. The Brotherhood knew not to bring it up, and he'd built walls around that pain so high that he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist anymore. "Is that why you look sad, even when you're not talking about her?" Emma asked. The perceptiveness of the question stunned him. This little girl had seen through the armor he'd spent years constructing, seen past the intimidating exterior to the broken father underneath. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess it is." Emma reached out and patted his hand gently. "Grandma Rose says that people who love someone who died never really stop being sad, but they can still have happy times too. Maybe you just forgot how to have happy times." Before Marcus could respond, they heard the front door opening and footsteps in the entryway. "Emma?" "Sweetheart, I'm home," called a woman's voice. Emma jumped. Wasn't lost on him. Steele was probably the most careful rider in the chapter. A man who'd survived Iraq and 15 years on dangerous roads by being smart about risks. If the storm had caught him, it meant conditions were worse than anyone had anticipated. "Bring him home, brothers," Mike said as the search teams headed for the door. Steele's family, and family doesn't get left behind. Morning sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of Rose's guest bedroom, where Marcus had spent the most peaceful night's sleep he'd experienced in 3 years. The pain in his leg had dulled to a manageable throb, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he'd awakened without the crushing weight of grief as his first conscious emotion. Emma appeared in the doorway, carrying a breakfast tray, her face bright with the satisfaction of someone performing an important task. "Grandma Rose made you French toast," she announced, carefully setting the tray on the bedside table. "She said injured people need good food to help them heal faster." Marcus struggled to sit up, still amazed by the kindness these strangers had shown him. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, we did," Emma said with the matter-of-fact certainty of a 7-year-old. "That's what you do for friends. The word hit Marcus harder than he expected. When had he last had a friend who wasn't part of the Brotherhood? Someone who cared about him not because of shared loyalty or mutual protection, but simply because he was a human being who needed help. "Emma, I made something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. From her small desk in the corner, Emma had spent the previous evening creating a get-well card from construction paper and crayons. The front showed a stick figure on a motorcycle under a smiling sun, with "Get Well Soon" written in careful, crooked letters. Inside, she had drawn a picture of the 3 of them sitting around Rose's kitchen table, with hearts floating above their heads. "I wanted to make sure you remember us," she said shyly, handing him the card. Marcus stared at the simple drawing, his throat tight with emotion. No one had made him a handmade gift since Sarah was alive. The innocence and love that had gone into this small creation was more valuable than any treasure he'd ever possessed. "Emma, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," he said, his voice thick. "I'm going to keep it forever." She beamed with pride, then grew serious. "Are you really leaving today?" "I have to. My friends will be worried about me, and your grandmother has done enough for one stranger. But you're not a stranger anymore. You're Marcus." The simple statement contained a profound truth. Somehow, in the space of one night, he had been transformed from a dangerous outsider into simply Marcus, a man with a name, a story, and people who cared about his well-being. Rose appeared in the doorway, holding a paper bag that smelled like homemade cookies. "I packed you some lunch for the road," she said, setting the bag beside his breakfast tray. "The roads should be clear enough for travel in a few hours." Marcus looked out the window at his motorcycle, which Emma had covered with a tarp during the night to protect it from the snow. The bike would need some work before it was roadworthy. The crash had bent the front brake lever and cracked the windshield, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. "Mrs. Richardson, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You don't need to thank us, Marcus. You just need to remember that there are people in the world who see the good in you. After breakfast, Marcus worked on his motorcycle while Emma watched from the porch, wrapped in blankets like a small, concerned supervisor. The damage was less severe than he'd feared, mostly cosmetic problems that wouldn't affect the bike's performance, but when he tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The electrical system had been damaged by moisture from the snow, and no amount of mechanical expertise could fix wet wiring in a frozen parking lot. "Looks like I'm stuck here a little longer," he called to Emma, who clapped her hands in delight. "Maybe it's a sign," she said. "Maybe your motorcycle wants to stay here too." Marcus couldn't help but smile at her logic. If motorcycles had feelings, his old Harley had probably never experienced the kind of gentle care Emma had shown it, covering it with a tarp and patting its seat like a beloved pet. Rose emerged from the house carrying jumper cables and a concerned expression. "My late husband always said that engines are like people. Sometimes they just need a little help getting started." Again, as Marcus worked on the electrical problem, he found himself hoping the repair would take longer than necessary. For the first time in years, he wasn't eager to return to his normal life. The warmth and acceptance he'd found in this small house was something he'd forgotten existed in the world. The rumble of motorcycle engines echoed off the quiet houses of Millbrook like rolling thunder. Tommy Wrench Martinez led a convoy of 6 Hells Angels through the snow-cleared streets, following the GPS coordinates from Marcus's last known location. They'd been searching since dawn, and the emergency beacon had finally started transmitting a weak signal. "There," Bear Martinez pointed ahead. "Black Harley by that White House." Tommy felt relief flood through him as he recognized Marcus's distinctive motorcycle, even damaged and covered with snow. But relief quickly turned to confusion when he saw Marcus himself, very much alive and apparently working on the bike's engine, while a small girl in a pink coat handed him tools. The convoy pulled up to the curb, and 6 leather-clad bikers dismounted their machines. The quiet residential street suddenly looked like a scene from a movie. The contrast between the domestic setting and the intimidating presence of the Hells Angels, almost surreal. Emma looked up from where she'd been helping Marcus with fascination rather than fear. "Wow, are these your friends, Marcus? They have motorcycles just like yours." Marcus straightened slowly, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew his brothers had come looking for him, but he also knew how this scene must look to them. A Hells Angel playing house with a suburban grandmother and her granddaughter. "Steal!" Tommy called out, striding across the yard. "Man, we've been looking for you all night." And Mike's got half the chapter out searching. The reunion was everything the Brotherhood code represented. Tommy embraced Marcus with the fierce affection of a man greeting a brother he thought might be dead. Bear and the others crowded around, checking for injuries, asking questions, their relief evident in every gesture. "What happened to you?" Bear demanded. "Your beacon went dark for 12 hours. Hit black ice about 2 miles from here," Marcus explained. "Broke my leg, damaged the bike's electrical system. This little girl saved my life." All eyes turned to Emma, who waved cheerfully at the group of intimidating bikers. "Hi, I'm Emma. Marcus got hurt in the snow, so I brought him inside to get warm. Grandma Rose made hot chocolate." Tommy stared at her, then at Marcus, trying to process this information. In 20 years of riding with the Hells Angels, he'd never encountered a civilian child who wasn't terrified of them. "You brought him inside?" Tommy asked carefully. "Uh-huh. He was really cold, and his leg was hurt. I have a doctor bag, so I took care of him." Rose appeared on the front porch, having heard the commotion. She surveyed the group of bikers with the same calm assessment she'd given Marcus the night before. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I assume you're Marcus's friends?" "Yes, ma'am," Tommy replied, automatically removing his helmet out of respect. "We've been searching for him since the storm hit. Well, he's been well cared for. Would you like some coffee? You must be cold after riding in this weather." The offer of hospitality to a group of Hells Angels was so unexpected that several of the bikers looked around uncertainly. as if checking to see if this was some kind of setup. "That's very kind of you." "Ma'am," Tommy said carefully, "but we should probably get Steele back home. There are people worried about him." Marcus's emergency GPS beacon, still blinking weakly in his jacket pocket, had been the technology that brought his brothers to him. But looking at Emma and Rose, he realized that technology had only accomplished half the rescue. The real salvation had come from human kindness. "Before we go," Marcus said, "I want you all to meet the people who saved my life. This is Emma Richardson and her grandmother, Mrs. Rose Richardson." Emma stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never learned to fear strangers. "Are you all in a motorcycle club like Marcus?" "Yes, little lady," Bear answered, his usually gruff voice softening. "We're his family." "That's nice. Families should take care of each other. Marcus told me about his daughter Sarah. She would have liked motorcycles too." The mention of Sarah created a moment of profound silence among the bikers. Marcus rarely spoke about his daughter to anyone, and never to outsiders. That he had shared her memory with this child spoke volumes about what had happened here. "She sounds like she was a special little girl," Tommy said quietly. "She was," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But Marcus is special too. He just forgot for a while." As Marcus prepared to leave with his brothers, he knelt down to Emma's eye level for a private goodbye. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. Will you come visit us again?" she asked. Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had seen past his fearsome exterior to the broken man underneath, and made a promise he intended to keep. "Yes," he said. "I will definitely come visit again." The Hells Angels clubhouse had never hosted a conversation quite like the one taking place around the scarred wooden table that served as both meeting space and altar of Brotherhood. Iron Mike sat at the head, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. While Marcus finished telling the story of his rescue for the third time, "Let me get this straight," said Phoenix, leaning back in her chair with an expression of amazement. "A 7-year-old girl dragged your 200-pound ass out of a snowbank, brought you inside, and spent the night taking care of you with a toy doctor's kit." "That's about the size of it," Marcus confirmed, pulling Emma's handmade card from his jacket pocket. He'd shown it to several brothers already, but each viewing seemed to reinforce the miracle of what had happened. Wrench studied the crayon drawing with the same intensity he usually reserved for motorcycle engines. "And she wasn't scared of you at all?" "Not for a second. She saw a hurt person who needed help, and that's all that mattered to her." Iron Mike had been listening to the story with the quiet attention he gave to all important club business. As president, he'd learned to read between the lines of what his brothers told him, and what he was hearing now went far beyond a simple rescue story. "This little girl did something for you that nobody else has been able to do in 3 years, Mike observed. "She brought you back," Marcus nodded, unable to deny the truth in that statement. For the first time since Sarah's death, he could think about his daughter without being consumed by rage and grief. Emma's innocent kindness had somehow created space in his heart for good memories, instead of just pain. "So, what do we do about it?" asked Bear, always the most direct member of the group. It was the question they'd all been thinking, but nobody had wanted to voice. The Hells Angels operated according to codes of honor and reciprocity that outsiders rarely understood. A debt had been created, and debts had to be repaid. "We thank her," Mike said simply. "Properly." He stood and walked to the wall, safe hidden behind a photograph of the club's founding members. The war chest key hung on a chain around his neck, never removed, never trusted to anyone else. Inside the safe was the emergency fund that had been built over decades, money set aside for legal fees, medical bills, and situations that required immediate resources. "How much do you think would be appropriate for saving a brother's life?" Mike asked, pulling out a thick stack of bills. "All of it," said Tommy without hesitation. "Kid saved Steele, she saved all of us. You can't put a price on that." But Marcus was shaking his head. "You don't understand these people. They're not going to take money for what they did. It would insult them, then what?" Phoenix asked. We can't just ride away and pretend this didn't happen. Marcus thought about Emma's wide-eyed fascination with their motorcycles, her complete lack of fear, her natural ability to see good in everyone she met. He thought about Rose's quiet wisdom and her willingness to open her home to a stranger. "We show them respect," he said slowly. "Real respect. The kind that matters." Iron Mike replaced the money in the safe, but kept the key in his hands, turning it over thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to organize a ride, not just our chapter. I want to reach out to every chapter within 500 miles. I want to show Emma and her grandmother what the Brotherhood looks like when we come together for something good." The suggestion created a moment of profound silence in the clubhouse. What Marcus was proposing had never been done before in the history of the Hells Angels. Chapters maintained their independence fiercely, and organizing a multi-state gathering required permissions, logistics, and coordination that could take months to arrange. "You're talking about maybe 2,000 riders," Wrench said quietly. "I'm talking about showing a little girl who saved one of our own that her kindness matters to all of us." Phoenix leaned forward, her expression serious. "The logistics alone would be a nightmare. Coordinating that many bikes, making sure everyone knows the rules, dealing with law enforcement. But it's possible," Mike said thoughtfully. "If we plan it right, if we reach out through proper channels, if we make it clear this is about respect and gratitude." Bear grinned, the expression transforming his usually intimidating face. "Can you imagine the look on that little girl's face when 2,000 Harleys roll up to her house? She'd probably try to hug every single one of us," Marcus said, and for the first time in 3 years his smile reached his eyes. Iron Mike stood and walked to the phone mounted on the clubhouse wall. "I'm calling the regional presidents. This is going to take some doing, but if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right." As he began dialing the first number, Marcus carefully folded Emma's card and returned it to his jacket pocket. Soon, that simple drawing would become the inspiration for the largest gathering of grateful bikers in Hells Angels history. The CB radio in the corner of Big Jim's truck stop crackled to life at 6:23 a.m., carrying a message that would travel across 5 states before noon. Iron Mike's voice, gravelly but clear, reached every chapter president within radio range with a story that seemed too extraordinary to be true. "This is Albany base to all regional presidents. We've got a special situation that requires Brotherhood coordination. A civilian child saved one of our own, and we need to show proper respect." In clubhouses from Massachusetts to Ohio, experienced bikers stopped their morning routines to listen as Mike told Emma's story. The CB message log that Phoenix maintained filled with responses as chapter after chapter checked in, asking for details, offering support, and requesting permission to participate. Boston base, confirming. "How many riders are we talking about?" Hartford base standing by. "When and where?" Springfield base requesting details on the little girl. By 8 a.m., word had spread beyond the CB network. Bikers used cell phones, emails, and face-to-face conversations to share the story of the 7-year-old who had rescued a Hells Angel from a snowstorm. Each telling added emotional weight to the tale, and each listener understood the significance of what was being proposed. Danny Torch Kowalski, president of the Boston chapter, called his officers to an emergency meeting. In 32 years of riding, he'd never heard of a civilian child showing such fearless compassion to a member of their brotherhood. "Brothers, this is bigger than just Albany's story," he told his assembled officers. "This little girl represents something. We've lost touch with the idea that people can look past the patches and see the human being underneath." Similar conversations were taking place in clubhouses across New England and beyond. The story of Emma's rescue was spreading like wildfire through the interconnected network of motorcycle clubs, growing in significance with each retelling. Meanwhile, in Millbrook, Emma went about her normal Saturday routine, completely unaware that her simple act of kindness was becoming legendary among 2,000 bikers across multiple states. She helped her grandmother with grocery shopping, played with the neighbors' new kittens, and worked on a puzzle featuring motorcycles that she'd found at the library. Grandma Rose, "Do you think Marcus is okay?" she asked over lunch. "His leg was still hurting when he left. I'm sure his friends are taking good care of him, sweetheart." They seemed very concerned about his well-being. What Rose didn't mention was the phone call she'd received that morning from a polite woman named Janet, who had identified herself as a member of Marcus's motorcycle club. The conversation had been carefully respectful, with Janet explaining that the group would like to visit Emma to properly thank her for her kindness. "How many people are we talking about?" Rose had asked. "Well, ma'am, that's still being determined. Word has gotten out about what your granddaughter did, and a lot of our people want to participate in showing their gratitude." Rose had agreed to the visit, though she'd asked for advance notice so she could prepare Emma appropriately. Something in Janet's tone suggested this would be more than a casual social call. By afternoon, the CB radio traffic had reached unprecedented levels. Chapter presidents were coordinating schedules, planning routes, and establishing protocols for what was being called the Millbrook Ride. The logistics were staggering. 2,000 motorcycles. Descending on a small town required careful planning to avoid traffic disasters or law enforcement. Confrontations. Phoenix to all units. "We need police coordination for this to work." Janet's voice crackled over the airwaves. "Nobody wants this to turn into a circus." State police departments in 3 states began receiving polite phone calls from Hell's Angels representatives, explaining the situation and requesting cooperation for a peaceful gathering. Most officers were skeptical at first, but the story of Emma's rescue began to change attitudes as it spread through law enforcement networks. "Let me get this straight," said Captain Murphy of the Massachusetts State Police. 2,000 bikers want to visit a little girl to say thank you." "That's the situation, Captain. No protests, no rallies, no trouble. Just a group of people who want to show gratitude to a child who helped one of their own." The preparations continued throughout the day, with chapters coordinating departure times, establishing radio frequencies, and designating road captains to maintain order during the massive convoy. Maps were studied, routes planned, and contingencies prepared for everything from mechanical breakdowns to weather delays. As evening approached, the CB radio log showed responses from 47 chapters across 5 states. The simple message that had started in Albany that morning had grown into the largest coordinated motorcycle gathering in Hell's Angels history, all to honor a 7-year-old girl who had seen a hurt person and decided to help. The rumble started as a distant whisper at 9:47 a.m. on Sunday morning, a low vibration that residents of Millbrook initially mistook for a passing freight train. By 10:15, the sound had grown into an unmistakable symphony of motorcycle engines, and people began stepping onto their porches to investigate. Emma was in the backyard, building a snowman with her grandmother's help, when the first wave of motorcycles appeared at the end of their street. She looked up from rolling the snowman's head, her mittened hands covered in snow, and her eyes grew wide with excitement. "Grandma Rose! Look, more motorcycles like Marcus's." Rose straightened slowly, her hand shading her eyes against the winter sun as she watched a procession of leather-clad riders turn onto their quiet residential street. She had expected a small group, perhaps a dozen members of Marcus's club. What she was seeing looked like a parade. The lead riders wore patches that said "Road Captain" and carried themselves with the authority of men accustomed to maintaining order in large groups. They guided their machines with practiced precision, parking in neat rows along both sides of the street. Behind them came more riders, and then more, until the entire block resembled a motorcycle showroom. Mrs. Patterson from next door appeared at her front window, then quickly disappeared again. Across the street, the Jenkins family stood on their porch, watching the procession with expressions of amazement and uncertainty. "Grandma, are all these people here to see us?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "I believe they are, sweetheart." The first rider to dismount was a woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat braid. She removed her helmet and approached the house with the measured steps of someone making a formal presentation. In her hands, she carried a small package wrapped in leather. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm Janet Williams. We spoke on the phone." Rose nodded, recognizing the voice from their earlier conversation. "Phoenix, isn't it? Marcus mentioned you." "Yes, ma'am." "And this must be Emma." Emma had abandoned her snowman and was walking toward the growing crowd of motorcycles with the fearless curiosity that had led her to rescue Marcus. She waved at the riders, many of whom waved back with expressions of amazement at her complete lack of intimidation. "Hi, did you all come to visit me?" she called out cheerfully. "We did indeed, little lady," Phoenix replied, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "We brought you something special." She unwrapped the leather package to reveal a small patch beautifully embroidered with the words "Emma's Angels" in golden thread. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of someone who understood the significance of such symbols in biker culture. "This was made especially for you," Phoenix explained, "to show that you're an honorary member of our family." Emma accepted the patch with the reverence she might have shown a precious jewel. "It's beautiful. Can I put it on my coat?" "Absolutely. That's exactly where it belongs." More motorcycles continued to arrive, filling not just their street, but the surrounding blocks. The sound of engines was constant now, punctuated by the voices of riders greeting each other and organizing themselves into some kind of formation. Police cars appeared at both ends of the street, but the officers who emerged seemed more concerned with traffic control than law enforcement. Captain Murphy, who had coordinated with the Hells Angels leadership, directed his men to help manage the parking situation rather than disperse the crowd. "I've never seen anything quite like this," he admitted to his sergeant. 2,000 bikers showing up to thank a little girl. It's not exactly what they taught us about in the academy. Emma, meanwhile, was moving through the crowd like a tiny ambassador, introducing herself to riders who towered over her but spoke to her with surprising gentleness. Many of them had children and grandchildren of their own, and Emma's fearless friendliness reminded them of what they were fighting to protect in their own families. "Are you really all Marcus's friends?" she asked a particularly intimidating rider whose arms were covered in tattoos. "We're his brothers," the man replied, his gruff voice softening as he spoke to her. "And any friend of Steele's is a friend of ours." "Steele? That's what we call Marcus. Everyone in the club has a road name." Emma considered this information seriously. "What's your road name?" "They call me Bear. That's a good name. You do look like a friendly bear." Bear Martinez, who had been in countless bar fights and had a reputation as one of the toughest enforcers in the Brotherhood, found himself smiling at this tiny girl's assessment of his character. Somehow, she saw past the scars and tattoos to something he'd forgotten existed within himself. As more riders continued to arrive, the peaceful Sunday morning in Millbrook was transforming into something unprecedented. A gathering of gratitude that would become legendary in both biker culture and the small town that hosted it. By noon, the transformation of Millbrook was complete. What had been a quiet residential neighborhood was now home to the largest gathering of motorcycles in the town's 150-year history. The sight was both magnificent and overwhelming. Nearly 2,000 Harley-Davidsons arranged in precise formations that stretched for 6 blocks in every direction. Emma stood on her front porch, her new Emma's Angels patch proudly displayed on her winter coat, trying to count all the motorcycles. She gave up at 53, but her fascination only grew stronger. Each bike was unique, customized by its owner with chrome accessories, custom paint jobs, and personal touches that told individual stories of the road. "Grandma Rose, look at all the different colors," she called out, pointing to a motorcycle painted with flames that seemed to dance in the winter sunlight. Rose had given up trying to process the magnitude of what was happening in her front yard. The polite phone conversation with Janet had not prepared her for anything approaching this scale. Yet what struck her most was not the overwhelming number of visitors, but their respectful behavior. Despite their intimidating appearance, the bikers maintained discipline that would have impressed a military unit. No one had trampled her flower beds, no one had left litter on the ground, and every rider who approached the house did so with evident respect for the property and its occupants. Iron Mike dismounted from his bike and approached the porch, carrying a leather-bound book that had been passed between chapters as the gathering grew. The book was thick with signatures, messages, and contact information from riders who wanted Emma to know she had extended family across 5 states. Mrs. Richardson, I'm Mike Sullivan, president of the Albany chapter. I believe you've been taking care of one of my brothers. Mr. Sullivan, Marcus spoke of you. He said you were the one who organized the search when he went missing. Family looks after family, ma'am. And your granddaughter has become family to all of us. He handed her the book, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. Every rider here has signed this for Emma. Names, chapters, and phone numbers. If she ever needs anything at all, she's got 2,000 brothers and sisters ready to help. Emma peered at the book with wide eyes as Rose opened it to the first page. The signatures were written in various hands, some neat and careful, others bold and flourishing. Many included personal messages. Thank you for saving our brother. You're braver than most grown-ups. Honorary angel for life. Can I really call any of these people if I need help? Emma asked with the practical curiosity of a 7-year-old. Absolutely, Mike replied. That's what family does. The crowd had organized itself with remarkable efficiency. Road captains from different chapters coordinated parking, established clear pathways for foot traffic, and maintained communication through hand signals and radio contact. What could have been chaos had become a demonstration of the discipline and organization that defined serious motorcycle clubs. Local residents, initially alarmed by the invasion of their quiet neighborhood, began venturing closer as they realized the peaceful nature of the gathering. Mrs. Patterson, who had spent the morning peering nervously through her curtains, finally emerged to get a closer look at the spectacle. I've lived here for 43 years, she told her husband, and I never imagined I'd see something like this on our street. Children from neighboring houses began appearing, drawn by their parents' curiosity and their own fascination with the impressive display of motorcycles. The bikers, many of whom were parents and grandparents themselves, found themselves answering questions about engine sizes, custom modifications, and the meaning of various patches. That's a 1200C engine, explained Tommy Wrench to a 10-year-old boy who was examining his bike with obvious admiration. She'll do 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds. Wow! Can I sit on it? Tommy looked to the boy's mother, who nodded after a moment's consideration. The child climbed onto the massive machine, his hands barely reaching. The handlebars, his face glowing with excitement. Similar scenes played out throughout the crowd. Tough-looking bikers patiently explained motorcycle mechanics to curious children, posed for photographs with local families, and shared stories of life on the road with anyone interested in listening. Emma moved through the gathering like a tiny celebrity, greeting riders who had traveled hundreds of miles just to meet her. Each introduction reinforced the reality of what her simple act of kindness had accomplished. Nurse bringing together people who might otherwise never have had reason to gather in peace. Are you really the little girl who saved Steele? Asked a rider whose jacket identified him as a member of the Connecticut chapter. I just helped him get warm, Emma replied matter-of-factly. Anyone would have done the same thing, but that, of course, was exactly what made Emma special. In a world where most people would have been afraid to approach an injured Hell's Angel, she had seen only a human being who needed help. At exactly 1 p.m., Iron Mike stepped onto the makeshift platform that road captains had constructed from motorcycle trailers parked side by side. The crowd of 2,000 bikers fell silent with a discipline that would have impressed a military commander. Emma stood beside her grandmother on the front porch, Still clutching the leather-bound book of signatures. "Brothers and sisters," Mike's voice carried clearly across the gathering, without need for amplification. "We're here today because of something extraordinary." A little girl named Emma Richardson looked past the patches, past the reputation, past everything that usually makes people cross the street when they see us coming. She saw a human being who needed help, and she helped him. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many of these riders had experienced the fear and prejudice that their appearance often generated. To hear about someone who had looked beyond that was profoundly moving. Steele Thompson was dying in that snowbank. Without Emma's courage and compassion, we would have lost a brother. Today, we're here to make sure she understands what that means to us. Marcus stepped forward, walking carefully on his still-healing leg. In his hands, he carried a small leather jacket, clearly custom-made for a 7-year-old. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Soft black leather decorated with careful stitching and a miniature version of the Hells Angels patch on the back, but modified to read Honorary Hells Angel in golden thread. "Emma," Marcus called out, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you come down here, please?" Emma looked up at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. Together, they walked down the front steps and through the crowd, which parted respectfully to create a clear path to the platform. When Emma reached Marcus, he knelt down to her eye level, the same position he'd been in when she first found him in the snow. But now, instead of being unconscious and injured, he was surrounded by his chosen family, presenting her with their highest honor. "Emma, this jacket represents something very special. The patches on it mean that you're part of our family now, forever." He held up the tiny leather jacket, and Emma gasped with delight. It was the most beautiful piece of clothing she'd ever seen, clearly made with love and attention to every detail. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, running her small fingers over the soft leather. "Can I put it on right now?" "That's exactly what it's for," Marcus said, helping her slip her arms through the sleeves. The jacket fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her measurements. On the back, the honorary Hells Angel patch caught the winter sunlight, while smaller patches on the front identified her as Emma Millbrook Chapter and Lifesaver. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as Emma spun around to show off her new jacket. The sound was thunderous, 2,000 pairs of hands clapping in appreciation for the tiny girl who had brought them all together. "There's something else," Iron Mike announced, stepping forward with a document that had been carefully prepared by the club's lawyer. "Emma, this certificate makes you an official member of the Hells Angels family. It means that wherever you go, whatever you need, you've got brothers and sisters ready to help you." Emma accepted the certificate with the same reverence she'd shown the leather-bound book. She couldn't read all the words yet, but she understood that something important was happening. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice somehow carrying over the vast crowd. "Marcus is my friend, and now you're all my friends too." Rose watched from beside the platform, tears streaming down her cheeks. In 68 years of life, she'd never witnessed anything quite like this moment. The sight of her granddaughter being formally welcomed into this unlikely family was both touching and surreal. "There's one more thing," Marcus said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small ring, silver and worn smooth by years of handling. "This was my daughter Sarah's promise ring. I gave it to her on her 6th birthday and told her it meant I would always love her and always protect her." Emma looked at the ring with wide eyes, understanding instinctively that she was being offered something precious beyond measure. "I want you to have it," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you're replacing Sarah, but because you remind me that there's still goodness in the world worth protecting." As he slipped the ring onto Emma's small finger, the crowd fell completely silent. Even the most hardened bikers found themselves moved by the profound gesture of a grieving father, passing on his most treasured possession to the child who had saved his life. Emma looked down at the ring, then up at Marcus, then at the sea of faces surrounding them. I'll take very good care of it, she promised solemnly, and I'll remember Sarah too. It was a promise that would bind her to this unlikely family for the rest of her life. Following the formal presentation, something magical happened that no one had planned or orchestrated. Emma, still wearing her new leather jacket and admiring Sarah's ring on her finger, began moving through the crowd with the natural curiosity of a child who had just made 2,000 new friends. "Can I see your motorcycle?" she asked Bear Martinez, who had been watching the ceremony with tears in his eyes that he thought no one would notice. "Of course, little angel," Bear replied, leading her to his massive Harley. "This is Bertha. I've been riding her for 12 years now." Emma examined the motorcycle with the same careful attention she'd given to her injured patient 2 nights earlier. She noticed the small photograph taped to the inside of the windshield, a school picture of a young girl with pigtails and braces. "Who's that?" Emma asked. "That's my granddaughter, Melissa. She's 8 years old, just a little older than you. She's pretty. Do you miss her when you're riding?" Bear's throat tightened. "Yeah, I do. I don't get to see her much since my daughter moved to California. That's sad. But you can look at her picture and remember how much you love her. It was the kind of simple wisdom that only children possessed, cutting straight to the heart of complex emotions that adults spent years trying to process." Meanwhile, a professional photographer named David Chen had arrived at the scene, initially drawn by reports of the massive biker gathering. What he found was something far more significant than a news story. It was a moment of genuine human connection that deserved to be preserved. "Excuse me," he approached Iron Mike respectfully. "I'm a photographer with the regional newspaper. Would it be possible to take some pictures of this gathering? I've never seen anything quite like it." Mike considered the request carefully. The Hells Angels were notoriously protective of their privacy, and photographs could be used against them in various ways. But this situation was different. "As long as you focus on the positive aspects of what's happening here," Mike agreed. "This little girl has brought out the best in all of us." David began capturing images that would become legendary in both motorcycle culture and local history. Emma posing with groups of intimidating bikers who smiled like proud uncles. Rose serving hot chocolate to leather-clad visitors on her front porch. Marcus kneeling beside his damaged motorcycle, explaining its mechanics to fascinated neighborhood children. But the most powerful photograph was completely candid. Emma surrounded by a circle of bikers, all of them listening intently as she told them about her toy doctor's bag and how she'd used it to help Marcus. The contrast between her small, innocent figure and the imposing presence of her audience created an image that spoke to the universal power of compassion. "She reminds me of my own little girl," confided Razor Williams from the Hartford chapter, showing Emma a wallet photo of a 6-year-old with curly red hair. "Lost her in a custody battle 3 years ago. Haven't seen her since. That's terrible," Emma replied with the directness that only children could manage. "But she probably thinks about you every day, just like you think about her." Razor stared at this tiny girl who somehow understood the pain that kept him awake at night. "You really think so?" "I know so. When people love each other, they never really stop loving, even when they can't be together." These conversations were happening throughout the gathering. Hardened bikers found themselves sharing stories of their children, their fears, their hopes for the future. Emma's fearless acceptance had created a safe space where vulnerability was not only acceptable, but welcomed. Mrs. Patterson, who had spent the morning convinced that her quiet neighborhood was being invaded by dangerous criminals, found herself in conversation with Phoenix about rose gardening. The two women discovered they shared a passion for heirloom varieties and organic pest control methods. "I never would have imagined," Mrs. Patterson admitted, "that someone wearing all that leather would know so much about composting techniques. People are rarely what they appear to be on the surface." Phoenix replied gently, "Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of that." The afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the gathering, and David Chen realized he was documenting something historic. This wasn't just a story about bikers thanking a little girl. It was evidence of humanity's capacity for connection across seemingly impossible divides. As he adjusted his camera settings to capture the golden light, Emma appeared at his side, studying his equipment with fascination. "Are you taking pictures of everyone?" "I'm trying to capture how special this day is," David explained. "It is special, isn't it? All these people came just to say thank you. Do you understand why that's so remarkable?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Because usually grown-ups are too busy or too scared to say thank you properly?" It was, David realized, the most accurate assessment of adult society he'd ever heard from a 7-year-old. As the afternoon progressed, Iron Mike found himself standing with Phoenix and Marcus near the makeshift platform, watching something unprecedented unfold before their eyes. What had begun as a simple expression of gratitude was transforming into something much deeper, a genuine community gathering that was breaking down barriers that had existed for decades. "Look at that," Phoenix said quietly, nodding toward the corner of the street where Emma was helping Tommy Wrench Martinez show a group of local children how to properly check motorcycle tire pressure. "And that," Marcus added, pointing to where Bear was deep in conversation with Mr. Jenkins about the challenges of maintaining classic automobiles versus vintage motorcycles. The transformation wasn't limited to casual conversations. Phoenix pulled a folded check from her jacket pocket, looking at it one more time before approaching Rose, who was sitting on her front steps watching the remarkable scene unfold. "Mrs. Richardson, the brothers and sisters here today have put together something for Emma's future," Phoenix said. Offering the check with both hands, Rose unfolded the paper and stared at the amount written in careful script. The scholarship fund check was made out for $50,000, with Emma Richardson Education Fund written in the memo line. "This is too much," Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, ma'am, it's not nearly enough. That little girl saved one of our own, and education is the best investment we can make in her future." Rose looked across the gathering at Emma, who was now wearing work gloves that were far too big for her hands while helping to polish chrome exhaust pipes under careful supervision. "She doesn't understand what she's accomplished here, does she?" Rose said. "That's exactly why she accomplished it," Phoenix replied. "Most adults would have been too afraid or too prejudiced to help Marcus. Emma just saw someone who needed help. The scholarship fund represented contributions from every chapter present, but the money was only part of the story. Individual bikers had been sharing their own tales of redemption throughout the afternoon, stories of second chances, family reconciliations, and personal transformations that proved people were capable of change. "I used to be angry all the time," confided Diesel Murphy from the Massachusetts chapter, speaking to a small group that included several local residents. "Lost my job, lost my family, thought the world owed me something. Took me years to realize that anger was just another kind of prison." "What changed?" asked Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down from Emma. "My grandson was born. Suddenly I had someone to live for instead of something to be angry about. Changed everything." These conversations were happening throughout the gathering. Bikers who rarely spoke about their emotions found themselves opening up to strangers who had initially feared them. Local residents discovered that the intimidating figures in leather and chains were fathers, grandfathers, veterans, and working people dealing with the same challenges that everyone faced. Emma, meanwhile, continued moving through the crowd like a tiny ambassador of goodwill. She had collected business cards from bikers who wanted to stay in touch, promised to send pictures of herself wearing the honorary jacket, and invited at least 30 people to visit any time they were passing through Millbrook. "You realize," Marcus said to Iron Mike, "that we're going to have brothers and sisters showing up in this town for years to come, just hoping to catch a glimpse of our honorary angel." "Could be worse," Mike replied with a grin. Could be that they'll start acting more like Emma when they meet other people who need help. It was a profound observation. The gathering was creating ripple effects that would extend far beyond this single afternoon. Bikers were already talking about similar charitable efforts, community outreach programs, and ways to use their organization's resources for positive purposes. Captain Murphy of the State Police had been monitoring the situation throughout the day, expecting problems that never materialized. Instead, he found himself impressed by the discipline and respect shown by the massive gathering. "In 30 years of law enforcement," he told his sergeant, "I've never seen 2,000 people gather this peacefully. They've been more orderly than most church picnics." As the sun began to sink lower in the winter sky, photographers and news crews from 3 states had arrived to document the unprecedented gathering. The story was spreading beyond the motorcycle community, capturing national attention as an example of how human connection could transcend social boundaries. But for Emma, surrounded by her new extended family and wearing her treasured leather jacket, it was simply a wonderful day, spent making friends with people who understood the importance of helping others. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was becoming a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. As the winter sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the reality of departure began to settle over the gathering. 2,000 motorcycles couldn't remain in Millbrook indefinitely, and many riders faced long journeys home before darkness made travel dangerous. Iron Mike stepped onto the platform one final time, his voice carrying the weight of someone bringing a historic moment to its conclusion. "Brothers and sisters, we came here today to honor a little girl who showed us the best of humanity. Mission accomplished. But before we ride, we need to make sure Emma understands that this isn't goodbye. It's see you later." Emma stood near the platform wearing her leather jacket, which had become her most treasured possession. The afternoon had been filled with more excitement and attention than her 7-year-old mind could fully process. But she understood that something important was ending. Marcus approached her one final time, moving carefully on his healing leg. In his hands, he carried a small velvet box that he'd retrieved from his motorcycle's saddlebags. "Emma, I have one more thing for you," he said, kneeling down to her eye level as he had so many times throughout this extraordinary weekend. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a motorcycle. It was clearly vintage, worn smooth by years of handling, and inscribed with words too small for Emma to read. "This necklace belonged to my daughter Sarah," Marcus explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I had it made for her 7th birthday, the same age you are now. The inscription says, 'Daddy's little angel.'" Emma stared at the necklace with wide eyes, understanding instinctively that she was being offered something irreplaceable. "But it was Sarah's," she said carefully. "Shouldn't you keep it to remember her?" Marcus smiled through his tears. "Emma, Sarah would want another little angel to wear it. And every time I see you wearing it, I'll remember both of you." He fastened the necklace around Emma's neck, where it settled against her leather jacket like a blessing. The weight of it was slight, but the significance was enormous, a grieving father's most precious keepsake, passed on to the child who had given him hope again. "I'll take very good care of it," Emma promised solemnly. "And when I grow up, maybe I'll give it to another little girl who needs to know she's special." The promise hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had somehow understood the true spirit of the gift, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a tradition of caring that could continue long after all of them were gone. Around them, the farewell process had begun with the same discipline that had marked the entire gathering. Road captains were organizing departure schedules, ensuring that 2,000 motorcycles wouldn't all try to leave simultaneously and create traffic chaos. But the individual goodbyes were deeply personal. Bear Martinez knelt down to give Emma a gentle hug, whispering, "You remind me why I want to be a better man." Phoenix pressed a card into Rose's hand with her personal phone number, saying, "Call me if you ever need anything, day or night." Tommy Wrench Martinez had spent the afternoon teaching Emma about motorcycle maintenance, and now he handed her a small toolkit sized for a child's hands. "Every biker needs her own tools," he explained seriously. The departures weren't rushed. Each rider seemed to understand that they were leaving behind something precious, and many lingered for final conversations, photographs, and promises to stay in touch. Emma moved through the crowd of departing bikers like a tiny receiving line, accepting hugs, handshakes, and business cards from people who had traveled hundreds of miles just to meet her. Her small hands were soon full of contact information, patches, and small gifts that represented the affection of her new extended family. "Will I really see you all again?" she asked Iron Mike as he prepared to mount his motorcycle. "Emma, you're family now." Family always finds a way to see each other. As the first groups of motorcycles fired up their engines, the sound that had marked the beginning of this extraordinary day began again. But now it carried a different meaning, not arrival, but the promise of return. Rose stood on her front porch with her arm around Emma's shoulders, both of them waving as the procession began. The street that had been filled with leather and chrome and the rumble of engines was slowly returning to its quiet residential character. But nothing would ever be quite the same. The scholarship fund check was safely tucked away for Emma's future. The leather jacket hung in her closet like a badge of honor, and Sarah's necklace rested against her heart as a reminder that love transcends loss. Most importantly, the understanding that kindness creates family had taken root in a way that would influence both Emma and her new brothers and sisters for the rest of their lives. 3 months later, the framed newspaper article hung in Emma's bedroom like a window into a magical day that had transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had witnessed it. The headline read, "Little Girl's Kindness Brings 2,000 Bikers to Small Town," and beneath it was David Chen's photograph of Emma, surrounded by her leather-clad guardians. Rose stood in the doorway watching Emma get ready for school. The morning routine, now including the careful placement of Sarah's necklace beneath her school uniform. The scholarship fund had been established at the local bank, growing with additional contributions that arrived weekly from bikers across the country who had heard the story. "Grandma Rose, do you think Marcus will visit again soon?" Emma asked, adjusting her backpack. "I'm sure he will, sweetheart. He calls every Sunday, doesn't he?" The weekly phone calls had become a treasured tradition. Marcus would tell Emma about his rides, his healing leg, and the positive changes happening within his chapter. Emma would share stories about school, her friends, and the neighborhood children who now gathered on Sunday afternoons to hear her tell stories about her motorcycle family. The impact of that extraordinary day had rippled far beyond Millbrook. The Hells Angels organization had quietly begun supporting similar community outreach programs, inspired by the positive response to Emma's story. Local law enforcement had developed better relationships with motorcycle clubs, recognizing that mutual respect could replace mutual suspicion. Mrs. Patterson had become an unlikely ambassador between the traditional residents and the occasional visiting bikers who stopped by to see Emma's house. She'd learned to distinguish between different motorcycle clubs and could explain the significance of various patches to curious neighbors. "The Angels are good people," she would tell anyone who asked. "That little girl saw their hearts before the rest of us were smart enough to look." Emma's influence extended to her school as well. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Collins, had incorporated the story into a lesson about not judging people by their appearance. Emma had brought in some of the patches and business cards she'd collected, sharing them with classmates who listened with rapt attention to her tales of friendship with people most adults found frightening. The scholarship fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Word of Emma's story had spread through social media, news outlets, and motorcycle magazines, inspiring donations from people who had never met her but were moved by her example. The fund now contained enough money to ensure Emma's education through college, with excess funds designated for other children who demonstrated similar acts of kindness. Rose had framed many items from that remarkable day. Emma's Get Well card that had started it all, Phoenix's business card, a photograph of Emma wearing her leather jacket, and most prominently, the newspaper article that had made their story known across the country. But the most significant changes were the ones that couldn't be captured in photographs or newspaper articles. Emma had learned that her actions mattered, that kindness created connections stronger than fear, and that family could be found in the most unexpected places. The neighborhood had learned to look beyond appearances, to welcome strangers with open hearts, and to understand that community could include people who looked very different from themselves. And somewhere on the highways between Massachusetts and Ohio, 2,000 bikers carried with them the memory of a little girl who had reminded them that humanity's capacity for goodness was stronger than its tendency toward judgment. Marcus still wore Emma's handmade Get Well card in his jacket pocket, now laminated and treasured like a sacred relic. He'd returned to Millbrook twice, each visit reinforcing the profound change that Emma's rescue had created in his life. The anger and grief that had consumed him for 3 years had been replaced by purpose and hope. "She saved more than my life that night," he'd told Iron Mike during their last chapter meeting. "She saved my soul." As Emma walked to school that morning, Sarah's necklace catching the spring sunlight, she passed the spot where she'd found Marcus in the snow. The memory made her smile, not because of the attention or gifts that had followed, but because she'd been able to help someone who needed it. That afternoon, she would receive another letter from one of her biker friends, this time from California, where Razor Williams had been reunited with his daughter after 3 years of separation. He credited Emma's simple wisdom: people who love each other never really stop loving, that with giving him the courage to keep trying. It was exactly the kind of ripple effect that Rose had always believed kindness could create, spreading outward in ways that might never be fully measured, but would continue long after Emma had grown up and moved on to create her own family. The framed newspaper article would remain in that bedroom for decades, a reminder that one small act of courage could change the world.